Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second of today's additional sessions. Everybody hear me okay? Yeah, lovely, great, thank you. Now, today we're going to be discussing the Council's note F89, which is on policy E11, and just the specific elements within that note. So we have allocated an hour. We're not anticipating it going over, but if it does, because obviously our first session did, does anybody have any issues with potentially staying for an extra quarter of an hour or half an hour at the most? We certainly won't be too late if it does indeed go over. Now, I think most people in the room we know, or you've certainly participated in sessions before, but I think there are a couple of people, or maybe one person who may not have been along before. So I will do a very quick introduction. My name is Yvonne Wright, and I've got my colleague in the meeting as well, which is Mr. Warden.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you. I'm not doing anything else in terms of introductions, because you should, by now, we should all know what we're supposed to be doing. So can I move over to the Council to do introductions, and then I'll go through the list, please.
Yes, ma'am. Paul, Shadow Review and QC, acting for the Council.
Thank you.
Good morning, Inspectors. Phil Drain, Director of Planning and Economy at Brentwood Council.
Thank you.
Good morning, Inspectors. Jonathan Quilter, Brentwood Council.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the Council present?
Sorry, ma'am. It's Tom Huang, Senior Planner at Brentwood Borough Council.
Thank you. Anybody else? Is that it from the Council?
That's it from the Council.
Right, great, thank you. Essex County Council, please.
Good morning, Mark Robinson from Essex County Council, from Transport Planning and Infrastructure.
Thank you.
Yes, Brendan Johnson from Essex County Council, Strategic Development Team.
Thank you.
Good morning, Alethea Evans. I'm the Infrastructure Planning Manager for the County Council.
Great. Welcome to the event. St Modwen and S&J Padfield, please.
Good morning, Madam. It's Reuben Taylor, QC here, and I've got with me Mr. Hollingworth, who I think you know. Mr. Kitesmark is here to deal with any transportation issues that we might need to comment on. And I've also got Mr. Flatman, who is a planning consultant who looked at our Greenbelt assessment that you'll have seen from Matter 3. So the intention is I'm going to do the talking, but I might pass the baton as and when.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. So there's nobody else present. There shouldn't be anybody else present, but I'm just checking. No. Okay. Thank you. Now, the purpose of the note, or in the hearing session under Matter 7H in particular, we asked the Council to consider three main points. The first one was about clarity relating to the wording on the wildlife site and the wording that's set out in the policy on that. Clarify the early years and childcare requirements that are set out in the policy. Having discussions with the County Council to just clarify that. And then the third point was the element around the site boundary and whether additional land for particular uses, i.e. the landscaping, the access point and the link road, should also form part of the site and should be removed out of the Greenbelt. So basically, I just want to go through those 3 points in that order. I know the main reason for the discussion is going to be the site boundary, but let's just quickly go over the point around the wildlife site policy wording that's set out in the plan. And this was around the protection and enhancement of this wildlife site, which obviously is adjacent to, is the Hobbs Hole local wildlife site. And you state in your note that the reasons why it's appropriate to protect and where necessary enhance is that this falls within the Thames Chase Community Forest area, and that the requirement would align with the framework to ensure that there are some compensatory measures. So it's with that particular point around removing land from the greenbelt and addressing compensatory measures. So can I just the first question is to the council. In relation to the first reason about this local wildlife site falling within the Thames Chase Community Forest area, how does the requirement set out in this policy relate to NE04, which is the policy about the Thames Chase community area? And I think there was you put in suggested changed wording to that in F87 when we discussed that, if my mind is correct on that. And I think when we discussed the Thames Chase Community Forest Policy, NE04, you have suggested a change to what's set out in the submitted plan. And all you're saying really is that any development proposals which fall within the Thames Chase Community Forest area should not prejudice the implementation aims and objectives of the Thames Chase plan.
That's correct.
And so really, I just wanted to confirm from the council's perspective that there's no conflict, there's no issue around what's set out in E11 in relation to the wildlife site and the policy NE04, and also obviously to policy NE01, which is about protecting and enhancing the local environment.
We don't think there is any conflict, Ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And in relation to your second reason that this would form compensatory measures, can the council just explain what they mean by that? Because the policy wording is protect and where appropriate enhance the adjoining local wildlife site. So what compensatory measures would protection and enhance and where appropriate enhancement? Because you're not proposing enhancement, it's where appropriate there could be enhancement. So I'm trying to understand whether the wording makes sense. If enhancements are necessary to compensate for the loss of greenbelt, should enhancements be explicitly set out? And then there is a question about, has this been discussed? I don't know who the owners of the Hobbs Hole wildlife site is, or who looks after it. Is it the council? Is it a local wildlife trust? Is it local landowners?
I'm not quite sure, actually, whether it's a trust or the local landowners, but I'll find out.
Okay.
I'll come back on that.
The reason why I'm asking is it's an ancient woodland site, and in your statement you've said, well, an enhancement could be increased access, but that may not be appropriate in ecological terms for an ancient woodland site, etc., etc. So it's exactly what is meant by enhance, and does that reflect? I know you're saying where appropriate enhancements, so it would then allow appropriate, as you said, appropriate enhancements to come forward. But has discussions been had with the owners of that site, or the people who maintain and look after that site?
I know discussions have taken place with landowners, but I'm not quite sure whether any specific enhancements or potential enhancements have been discussed yet. I think the idea behind this is that it's a matter that will be considered at a detailed stage in terms of looking at means of providing access to those occupying the site as employees, where suitable and appropriate, of course, having regard to the interest to be protected.
So it's going to be at the more detailed application stage that consider it. So this is just a hook.
It's a hook, that's right.
That will assist. Okay.
Yeah, and insofar as there is an enhancement in terms of access or accessibility, where depending upon what controls are necessitated, then we would say that that aligns with the requirement in the MPPF to provide compensatory improvements, which of course isn't just in terms of the nature of the green belt, but also in terms of access to it for recreational purposes. So, so that's the way in which we've put this.
Okay.
It provides that opportunity.
Thank you. I haven't got any further questions on that, so we can, unless anybody else has got anything they want to say on that point, then we can move on to the second point in your note, which is in relation to the early years and childcare provision.
Sorry, I've got something to say.
Oh,
on
sorry,
behalf
Mr. Taylor.
Sorry. I just wanted to say a few matters, really, a few points. You'll recall from earlier representations that I've made, my clients have made, in relation to the overlap between some of the elements of policy E11 and other policies in the plan. And we raised as a point of principle whether it's appropriate to have policies in E11 which overlap with other policies in the plan. And this wildlife point is exactly an exemplar of that. We maintain the position that it's not necessary to have the words relating to wildlife in policy 11, because policy NE01 captures the point entirely. So there is no need for these additional words. Further, the words put the cart before the horse. They establish that compensatory provision is going to be necessary before the scheme's even being fully designed and the impact assessed. And so we say that is without any evidential basis, and those words are therefore not sound. In terms of the suggestion that there is some adverse impact upon the ancient woodland as a result of the development, that's simply not established. In terms of the suggestion that there should be access to the ancient woodland and that is enhancement, again, that puts the cart before the horse, because access to ancient woodland can very often involve adverse impact that outweighs the benefit of increased public access to such facilities. Indeed, from my own experience, I know that the guidance that Natural England puts out suggests there should be things like a 15-metre buffer where development is proposed in proximity to ancient woodland, never mind access into it, so that employees can enjoy its benefits. So we just say that these words continue to be unnecessary. We had understood that the council had undertaken to go away and examine all of the elements of policy E11 and whether they were going to be required in the light of the other policies in the plan. We were hoping that is work that is still to be done, and that discussions in that regard will continue. So we're a little bit taken aback to see the suggestion now that in relation to early years provision, which we'll come to, and this wildlife element, that they are to retain, because there are other aspects of E11, the landscaping provision, for example, and other matters which we thought were being reviewed.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Council like to respond on that point?
Again, we don't think there is any conflict. NE01 is a very broad-based policy requiring net environmental gain and other benefits. This is the Hobbs Hole specific policy is merely a protective policy. And what we're trying to do here is not prejudge what enhancements might be appropriate, but to, as you said, Ma'am, provide the hook for consideration. It might turn out at the end of the day that Natural England say that there shouldn't be any access, or others might provide evidence at the application stage to suggest that it's not appropriate. But I can't see that the inclusion of this element in the policy is in any way unsound, nor does it cause any interpretational conflict, as it were, between its application specifically and the application of NEO 1 and NEO 3. Sorry, NEO 4, that should have been.
Anything more, Mr. Shadoravian?
No, ma'am, not on that particular point.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, you've still got your hand up. Is that?
Yeah, it's deliberate.
Comment?
It is, yeah, just it's a very short point, which is simply this. What is the hook that is required by the words in E11, which is not already provided by NEO 1 and NEO 4?
Mr. Shadoravian, do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, I lost a bit of that. Can you come?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Shadoravian. The point I made was just I just wondered out loud, really, what is the hook that is required through the wording in policy 11 now proposed, which is not provided by NEO 1 and NEO 4 already?
Simply that it's site specific and relates to the particular asset. That's the difference.
Okay. Thank you.
Ma'am, I think you've got the point.
I've got the point. Thank you. Let's move on to the second point, and I'm sure this is going to be a similar argument, Mr. Taylor, potentially around the early years and childcare provision. Now, policy wording now suggested by the council on this is set out in F89 to provide an appropriate degree of flexibility, which is that it should now say proportionate contributions towards relevant early years and childcare nursery facilities, including provision on site where necessary. Now we tasked the council to go away and clarify why this provision was required on the site and why too, how that had been calculated. And then we tasked them to then set out why that approach was appropriate and whether it was justified. And now our questions are, or the approach is now proportionate contributions towards relevant early years and childcare nursery facilities. What does that mean? And how, if facilities are required, how would that be brought forward on site? And who would it be brought forward by? If proportionate contributions are, if it's all in relation to, if it's a requirement that is necessary for the development of E11, then what does proportionate contributions mean and where would they come from? Because obviously you've got E10 adjacent and other adjacent development close by. So I'm trying to understand the shift in the council's approach, or the suggested shift in the council's approach, because obviously we've still got what's set out in the submitted plan. So could the council just explain its sort of reasoning for moving? And we're just trying to understand why there was obviously a reason why it was put into the plan as it's written.
I'm going to assist you in that one, if that's okay.
Yes, please, Ms. Huang.
Yeah, so the approach that we took when the plan was submitted was a process, a result of a process of conversations with Essex County Council and developers. And back in early the early stage, we estimated that the site would be accommodating around 4,000 jobs on site. And based on the Essex County Council's Developers Guide, every 100 employees would typically yield around 4 childcare places. And typically for smaller employment size, that would be contributed by some form of financial contributions to the existing facilities. However, when the child yields reach up to certain amount, then that would trigger a contribution in terms of a facility on site, for example, or off-site, or what are the measures that Essex County deemed necessary. And so when we give the county the amount of jobs that would be accommodated on the site, they run their model and come to the conclusion that there would be a need for 2 facilities on site. And however, recent conversations, as the plan making process goes forward, we understand that the developers made it clear that the site will accommodate more or less 2,000 jobs. And so therefore it may not necessarily need 2 childcare facilities on site. So we got in touch with ACC and said, after the hearing session the other week, and ACC has considered that there may be a need for a flexibility there, so that the facility or whatever contribution would be proportionate to the development, the quantum of the development proposed on site. So therefore, in terms of contribution, it could be a form of financial contributions to the facilities surrounding the area, or it could be the a facility on site. However, it would have to be decided upon the proposed quantum at the planning application stage. So we propose to them the wordings that is put forward to you in F89. And Essex County Council has confirmed that approach is more appropriate than previously put in the plan.
Thank you for that, Ms. Huang. That's a really useful summary of why the requirement was set out in the plan, and now why your approach, your suggested approach, is as worded. Mr. Taylor, can I bring you in on this and understand from the site developer's perspective your points on this, because obviously this is a suggested new wording. So can I just ask for your comments, please?
Yes, ma'am. We're much happier with this wording than the previous wording. The point of principle that we raised has been acknowledged and indeed accepted. The only remaining issue is the point about whether it's appropriate to have those words in a site-specific policy as opposed to a more generalised one that applies to all development, in terms of the need for a contribution from all development towards early year provision on a proportionate basis. I think that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a council response to Mr. Taylor's point about whether actually it needs to be in the actual site-specific policy, or whether it's clearly set out elsewhere within the plan, or should be clearly set out elsewhere?
Yes, ma'am. So the requirement for contributions to educational facilities are set out in Essex Infrastructure Guide to Contributions, but this document is assigned material weight when considering planning applications, but it's not adopted by the council. So we consult the county at planning application stage in terms of appropriate contributions, and therefore having this requirement in the policy, especially considering this is a strategic employment site in the borough, catering a large amount of jobs, which would also generate some certain needs for early years and childcare on site, potentially on site, or other facilities in nearby locations, would give us and county that certainty, that confidence that the need to be met when development comes forward.
What nearby facilities are there?
At the moment, not on top of my head, I can't remember, but we also need to consider that in the future, Dunton Hills Garden Village would also provide certain early years and childcare facility. And if there is a need for these facilities to be expanded, then certain contributions may need to be secured for that expansion.
I suppose I'm thinking about the travelling aspect of, you know, facilities are provided on site, then that's much more sustainable rather than facilities being provided elsewhere, potentially. But obviously there comes a point of economies of scale, doesn't there, as to where facilities can be provided.
You're right as well. That's absolutely right. So if there is a need for a childcare facility to be provided on site based on the demand from employees on the site, then that policy then would provide a hook. So if the county, for example, as the education provider, see that there is a need for that facility on site, then the policy would then provide basis for us to secure that facility.
Thank you. Can I bring Ms Evans in, please?
Thank you. I guess just to clarify that although we have a responsibility to ensure provision, we don't provide early years facilities as such. We don't run them. They are third-party facilities. If there are neighbouring facilities within a fairly decent distance, then they would potentially be expanded or given the opportunity to expand. It's a bidding process, so they would utilise that Section 106 money if it came in from this development at a proportionate level as per the change. Or we would work with the developer of this site in particular to ensure a new facility was brought forward on the site itself. Yeah, it's an incredibly flexible situation which can work really well for everyone involved, actually. And obviously we want employees to benefit as much as they possibly can. They're paramount in this.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any queries on this point or any further comments? Mr. Taylor, please.
Thank you, Madam. It's really the same point I made last time. We think the policy SP04 in the plan already deals with this position. It's the policy that requires the funding of additional infrastructure to support development via either on-site provision of new facilities or contributions to off-site capacity. It plainly embraces this particular issue. And so there's just, again, no need for the hook, because the hook provided here doesn't provide anything which isn't already provided for by policy FP04.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Does the council wish to respond on that?
You will have regard to the wording as proposed to be altered on SP04. It's a strategic policy of general application. It doesn't actually delve down into detail. It sets the principle for contributions, but does no more than that. So it is important that this particular policy identifies this as a potential need to be addressed. Could I just go back to the other point that Mr. Taylor made in relation to what the ancient woodland? When you come to consider the point he makes and the points I've made, just have regard to the specific provisions of NEO 1 as proposed to be amended, and it does, of course, require biodiversity net gain across all development and enhancements where possible. But there is nothing in there about access. Now, I know the point being taken is that it's probably unlikely that one would want to encourage further access to the wildlife site, but that's the distinction I would draw between policy NEO 1 and the site-specific requirements we suggest ought to be applied in this case to allow those matters to be considered at the application stage.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anything further on the early years and childcare facility element of the F89 note? No. Okay, thank you. Can we move on then to look at site boundary issues? And in the discussion that we had on this site allocation in matter 7H, this was discussed. So I don't necessarily want a complete repeat of that, of what was discussed. We heard what was discussed there. What we do wish to discuss is the council's change in their approach, because in the matter 7H, the council was quite adamant in saying that these areas of land did not require to be taken out of the green belt. So obviously we do want to discuss that. Obviously they were charged to consider whether that approach was correct, and obviously you've come back in your note to say that you feel that that approach isn't correct, and that these areas of land do need to be taken out of the green belt. And you've given specific reasons for that for the three areas of land that are under discussion. So you've got the area of land to the north of the site, which is where the link road is proposed. You've then got the area of land where the access would come in off the B186. And then you've got the area of land where the landscaping and reprofiling would occur. Now, my first comment is this would be a significant additional release of land from the greenbelt. There's no doubt it's quite a significant chunk of land. So that's the first point. What we want to know, we understand first of all, is what has changed. And I want to specifically look at what the greenbelt says in terms of exceptions. So you state in your note, so obviously in terms of the submitted plan, the allocation as set out in your policies map, you've said that that's sound. You're now saying that that's not sound because you consider that the applicant would need to demonstrate the existence of very special circumstances should these developments come forward. But I'm trying to understand how that relates to paragraph 146 of the framework, which sets out certain aspects of certain forms of development that are exceptions and are not considered to be not inappropriate. That may be too many negatives, but it's not inappropriate in the greenbelt, provided they preserve openness, etc., and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within the greenbelt. So are these operations engineering operations, and are they local transport infrastructure operations? Or are there going to be some material changes of use in the land that relate to recreation, i.e. the landscaping area? Is that going to be used for recreation? So I think we'd like to understand from the council's perspective why you now consider that this is necessary, because the link road, the reprofiling and landscaping and the access road would all be inappropriate development. So could you just take us through that, please? If I ask the council first, and then I'll obviously bring in Mr. Taylor.
Let me first of all begin by emphasising the necessity of these works in order to facilitate the allocated development. So it's a very important point. Having established the importance of these works, one has to consider their nature in terms of Greenbelt policy. Now, I know that the MPPF talks about local transport improvements. The kind of thing the MPPF is contemplating in that context is not the kind of works which are being proposed here, which are major roadworks in the Greenbelt, requiring significant engineering and other operations. The result of those engineering operations and works will be the creation of major highway infrastructure. And I know it's a question of fact and degree as to whether or not that might be inappropriate, depending upon its impact on openness. But I suggest that the chances are it would be inappropriate development. And I've been involved in a number of cases where inspectors have taken the view that even the creation of a hard standing of much smaller proportions than this in a greenbelt constitutes inappropriate development. So I've got no hesitation in saying that in all probability these would be considered as inappropriate. So that deals with area 2, the blue shaded area. Area 3, shaded yellow, is the subject, or has been the subject of discussion between the promoters and ourselves. And we now have a fuller understanding of what is required there in terms of landscape mitigation to enable the proposals to come forward. And although landscaping per se is not an issue in terms of the Greenbelt, engineering operations that result in substantial changes to landform could constitute inappropriate development once the detailed nature of those proposals is understood. And I know that Mr. Taylor's got more to say on this particular point because we've discussed it. But again, we need to be confident at this stage that what's being proposed there would not be inappropriate, given the importance of this component of the development to the success and acceptability of the employment allocation being built out. So again, having understood more fully what the implications of the works are, we're of the view that it's appropriate that the allocation boundary be extended to encompass Area 3 as well.
Mr. Taylor, or well, are there any other comments from the council on that?
No,
you want to add?
I was only just going to add briefly. Thank you, Inspector. Just that what you've reflected on in terms of the change of position, just reflecting the fact, as Mr. Shadow even set out, really the degree to which we've considered this issue, and indeed the reluctance from the point of view of the greenbelt aspect that you've mentioned. You know, this council has always tried to limit the amount of greenbelt release to being absolutely what is necessary, and so that being our historic position on this issue, really being reluctant to release any more than is needed. But as Mr. Shadow even set out, following further consideration, we believe that this is appropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor. Have your comments on this, please.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, we're very grateful to the council for reviewing the position and for setting out its changed stance in F89. I can confirm from my clients that getting the council to the position where it's accepted that this additional land, which is not required for built form, should be taken out of the Greenbelt has been a difficult process. They have been extremely reluctant to allow further release. So its position is one that is a considered position and has taken a long time to get to. The justification for it is quite simple. The Brentwood Business Park Enterprise Park is an essential development in order for the employment aspects of this plan to be sound. It's therefore necessary to ensure that every aspect of that development coming forward can be delivered. To ensure that the amount of floor space that is required does come forward. That inevitably involves looking at what developments needed to support or what mitigations necessary to support that scheme. That includes the land to the south and the land to the east for the access. There is uncertainty at present unless the amendments that are now being sought are provided, because it's unclear how a decision maker would consider the implications of the works proposed for the access and indeed the mitigation works, including reprofiling to the south. The paragraph 146 does not result of the MPPF doesn't resolve that uncertainty, rather it is the source of it. To be appropriate development, you have to fall within one of the categories. You have to preserve openness of the Greenbelt and not conflict with the purposes of the land within it. Each of those stages involves uncertainty in relation to these aspects of what would support the enterprise park. In particular, profiling is obviously an engineering operation, falls within the categories. And there are numerous different approaches to reprofiling by inspectors up and down the country every year. That's not a criticism, it's just the nature of the articulation of the concept of openness. It's quite a tricky concept to get a handle on. So there is uncertainty as to whether reprofiling would be viewed as preserving openness or not. There is also then an issue about whether or not there'd be conflict with the purposes of land being included in the Greenbelt, for example, encroachment into the countryside. It is essential for this plan to support the enterprise park, and so that uncertainty has to be removed in the plan, and that is why, in relation to the access and the land to the south, we need to remove these areas to ensure appropriate mitigation. In relation to the link road, the position is slightly different, because the link road is required to support the needs of general growth, identified in the plan. It's important when you read F89 to see the way it's put in paragraph 6 of that document, which reflects the proper position. There's a slight shift in emphasis in paragraph 9A, which I think is slightly badly worded, but just to put a marker down that the correct position is that the link road is necessary to support the generalised growth. It isn't necessary on its own to support the development on E11. But the provision of that road inevitably is going to involve reprofiling and engineering works. There are inspectors that, for example, take the view that the passage of traffic across an area of land conflicts with openness. So the road itself, there's uncertainty about whether or not that would preserve openness. And again, the same uncertainty arises in relation to the purposes of including land within the Greenbelt. So we say again, it's important with looking at all of those factors to gain the certainty that these changes provide. The other aspect I would emphasise, of course, is that we need to ensure that the plan contains words that make it clear that these areas that we're talking about are not to be used for the provision of employment floor space. So this is not I'm not representing a developer saying take the land out so I can build more floor space on it. It's quite the reverse. It's a very different sort of removal from the green belt that one might otherwise see at this stage. Unless there's anything else, that's all I propose to say.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I would like to understand the County Council's perspective on this, as we invited them along. There are an awful lot of roads in Brentwood that are in the Greenbelt, and which came first, the Greenbelt designation or some of the roads, and just understanding this link road and I understand from when we had this discussion under 7H that this link road is not just about E11. It's a requirement for the planned growth coming forward, and I know that other discussions about transport are currently ongoing, etc. So I'm trying to understand the logic or the need for this to be outside of the Greenbelt, with the and the necessity for soundness reasons. Just looking at the link road and the access point, those two particular points, then we'll come on to discuss the landscape reprofiling element. I'm just trying to understand the reasons for soundness as to why those elements need to be within the site area boundary and taken out of the Greenbelt, because they could be within the site area boundary but still be within the Greenbelt, so that the policy still related to them. But so there are several ways that things can be taken forward. So is there any comments that the County Council wants to make on this to try and assist us from your perspective, or is it not something you would like to get embroiled in?
A bit of both, I suspect. The link road required to address the difficulties with the proximity of the two junctions, the M25 junction and the B186 junction, and the potential weaving issues on the A127 because of the short distance. So the link road is a solution that would alleviate that problem, which would otherwise be exacerbated by the local plan growth in general.
So it's not necessary for E11 though, it's for the totality of the planned growth. It's not necessary for E11 on its own. It's partly required for E11, but not entirely for E11. I mean, that was made clear as part of when we had that discussion.
Great.
Just, you may not wish to answer this question, but I will ask it anyway. Your views on bringing forward strategic highway infrastructure in the Greenbelt?
That's not really something I can answer, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay. What about the obviously the access point is as it is, and is that the blue area that's highlighted on the plan? I've got the plan up in front of me. The blue area that's highlighted, is that, have you had those discussions with the landowner, with the developer, and that's where I know it's still dependent upon an actual, it would be up to a full application or an outline application first of all, however the process however it comes forward. Have you had those discussions about, yes, that's going to be where the access is, or could it be somewhere else along that road?
If I could invite my colleague Mr. Johnson to come in at that point, he's been closer to those particular.
That would be useful. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Morning, Inspector. Yes, that is broadly, well, the area of the drawing is broadly where it is. There are basically two alignments, which you probably know. I think that encompasses both of them. So.
Thank you. So can I just thank you for that. I'll move away from the from that aspect. Can I just have a there's a couple of hands up at the moment because I was going to move on to the Greenbelt assessment and the impact of that, but I'll take a couple of hands first. Can I come to my colleague first, Mr. Taylor? So I'll come to my colleague and then I'll come to you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Warden, please.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wright. Just a question for Mr. Johnston, I think, here in just picking up what he's just said in relation to Mrs. Wright's point. And looking at the extent of the blue area, you've said that that includes the options that have been considered for the access of the site from the B road. Is the site not accessible from the B road by an access point further up towards the site itself?
I'm getting mixed, but are we talking about the link road here or the access?
No, I'm talking about the access road.
Excuse me, road. Okay, the access road from down the B186.
Yes.
South of the A127. Yes, sorry. Yeah. I might have been misunderstood the first question from Mrs. Wright. So could you repeat the question again, please?
I may have misunderstood it as well. So, but I'm looking at the blue area.
Yes.
On the plan, and the access point that extends down towards the railway. The blue area extends down towards.
Yeah.
Is that extent because of a requirement?
Yes, it is. It's to achieve highway standards, basically. Mr. Cates Markaway, I understand, is on this call as well. We'll be able to fill you in on the full details, but that's basically to comply with highway standards. There are certain departures of standards and certain criteria, like reducing the speed limits and such like, that we've had to get sign off at the county to get that agreed in the first place. But yes, that's basically the issue, is to achieve highway standards, highway safety standards.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Wright.
Thank you for that clarity. Yes, I was referring to the blue area, so my apologies if that wasn't clear, Mr. Johnston.
Excuse me.
But that's okay. Don't worry. Yeah, my question may not have been clear, so thank you.
Sorry, then sorry, Mrs. Wright. Is the answer that Mr. Johnston gave to your question, which I think you may have been referring to a different part of access road?
I was.
Do you wish to then clarify your point then to Mrs. Wright's question, Mr. Johnston, if actually she was referring to the blue area?
Can you repeat your question, Mrs. Wright?
I don't know if I can remember it, to be fair. Well, yes. I think it was the same question that Mr. Warden has actually said, was because my question was, is there anywhere else along the B186? Does that access have to come from there, or can it be elsewhere along the B186? So that was my question.
Yeah. I mean,
you've just given the response to Mr. Warden. So
yeah, exactly. We've had many discussions with the developer and their consultants and such like, and I'm sure the transport consultant will be able to tell you that they've looked at all along that route, and this was basically their last option, I think, effectively, or their only option, shall we say?
I'm sorry, Mrs. Wright. Just
no, go ahead.
And for clarity, then, that access off that B road through the blue area, notwithstanding what I suppose is that would always be required permanently as an access point, notwithstanding anything that might happen on the area access to the north.
Well, just to be clear, the access to the north was not on the table, was not, not to our knowledge. the original access to this site was off junction 29, so this was basically with Lower Thames Crossing proposals and such like. They had to find an alternative option for accessing their site, and this was the only option they had.
Yes, because we're fully aware that there's an existing access, and we discussed this as part of the Matter 7H about if the Lower Thames Crossing comes in and what impacts that has, etc. So what we're being told is that this will become, or this is, an access that is absolutely necessary in order to bring the site forward. Is that correct?
That is our understanding.
Can I get that clarity from Mr. Taylor as well? Is our understanding correct?
Yes, that is correct. I wonder if I might be able to assist further unless you've got anything more from Mr. Johnston.
Mr. Warden, do you have any more questions to Mr. Johnston?
No, and if Mr. Taylor's able to help, then let's hear from him.
I'll try my best.
Yes, please, Mr. Taylor.
I've got Mr. Kitesmark here if I go wrong. So, and indeed, if you need more. So, we would point you to our Matter 3 submission on this. Appended to that in Appendix B, you'll find the details of the access from the B186 in particular. Page 32 of that document, you'll see a nice plan with it all laid out. The issue about its location is simple. That is the only location for an access from the B186 that we've been able to identify that meets the highway standards. And if you look at that plan, you'll see that, for example, if the access were to move further to the north, there is a bend in the road which immediately causes difficulties in terms of visibility displays. And there are also other properties on both the east and the west side of the B186 with their various accesses. And so that too presents difficulties in terms of the juxtaposition of access on one side of the road with accesses on the other. Similarly, if you move south, you'll see that on the other side of the road, that's to say the east side of the road, there's a trading park, the Upminster Trading Park, and an access there, which also prevents issues in design terms. So all of these matters have been looked at really in very significant detail by Mr. Kitesmark and his team, and I am instructed that this is the only location for a road on the B186. So that's in a nutshell the position. If you do want more technical detail, and there's a lot more of it, Mr. Kitesmark is here to help you.
I don't think it's necessarily an issue about where the access is. You've clarified that particular point. Our issue and what we're looking at is obviously whether that is required. I'm just looking at the access arrangements now, whether that's required to be removed from the greenbelt in order for it to be delivered. Obviously, that's up to ourselves to consider that, but that's why we're having this discussion today, to understand all of the connotations. So I'm looking at the access arrangements at the moment. Do you want to bring in Mr. Kitesmark?
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Kitesmark, I know you've got your hand up. So, Mr. Kitesmark, is there anything further you want to add to the discussions, just to assist us in understanding? Is Mr. Kitesmark struggling to come in?
Thank you, Inspector.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
I was just having a little problem there. Yes.
That's okay.
I'd just like to add to Mr. Taylor's point, in terms of the position, or to reaffirm that the position of that access is fixed. There is no other possible position for that access. And the key constraint to the south, as much as the trading park is a constraint, more importantly, it's the humpback bridge over the railway that is the key constraint to move to forward visibility, which would prevent it moving further south. So it is literally positioned at the best possible location between the two constraints to forward visibility to the north and to the south. So it is the only location where it can go. In terms of its necessity for bringing forward the Brentwood Enterprise Park, it is absolutely essential that that is provided in addition to any other access to the north, for two reasons. Firstly, we believe it will be the only position where it will be feasible to bring in sustainable transport, such as demand responsive transport, to make the site sustainable. It would be very difficult to bring that in, or much more convoluted routes to bring the demand responsive transport in via any other route to the development. So it's a key component for delivering the sustainability of the site. And the second point, that the access to the north would not be sufficient to provide access to all destinations, specifically to the A127 to the east, because of the configuration of the alignment of the link road wouldn't allow traffic to access the B186 at that location and then immediately do a U-turn to gain access onto the on-slip onto the A127 eastbound. So this access is an essential component of the delivery of the Brentwood Enterprise Park.
Thank you.
Madam, if I may, just on this point about whether it actually needs to come out of the greenbelt, if you look at the plan I referred to in our Matter 3 submissions in Appendix B, page 32.
Yeah, I have it up.
You'll see that there's the road sits on there's a platform built for the road in cutting, as it were, and you can see the embankment marked in green with the appropriate shape. So there are obviously changes to the landform proposed in order to provide that road, involving engineering operations, and so then that means before within the category in the paragraph in the MPPF we were looking at, the questions of openness and contribution to the purposes of the greenbelt still fall to be considered. The movement of traffic, the creation of a hard surface in the greenbelt, the presentation of an embankment, an artificial embankment edge, are all matters which inspectors in the past have identified as giving rise to adverse impacts on openness. And so rather than take that risk that a decision maker would need to form a judgment as to whether or not it's appropriate or inappropriate development, the plan needs to grapple with that now and remove this land from the greenbelt so that the issue is sorted once and for all.
And can I just clarify what the rest of the blue area would contain? Obviously the road wouldn't cover all of it. Obviously, I know you're talking about there would be an element of reprofiling. You show that on the cross sections, etc.
Yes.
So what would be on there? Is that further landscaping then?
I'm just seeing if I can find that in my notes to assist. I think somebody else from my team is going to have to help you there. Mr. Hollingworth might know the answer more than I do, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mark. If I could just come in there.
Yes, please.
Yes, I think in terms of all of that area to be released, the additional area to the south of the present proposed allocation, it is either a combination of reprofiling landscaping or the access that is required from the south. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring in Mr. Robinson, please?
Thank you, Inspector. I'm just going to flag that obviously the transport movements in this area are still going to be influenced by the flows on junction 29, which we've covered in separate sessions, are still to be confirmed. So just to flag that as a caveat.
Yes, yes. Obviously, we won't be giving any directions as to what shouldn't occur on this site and other sites until we have all the transport information, which won't be until obviously later during the summer. So, but obviously we're trying to just understand as far as we can now, so that any future sessions can just be focused on specific areas. But thank you for highlighting that. We are aware of that. Thank you. Mr. Warden, is there anything further on the access element? I was going to move on to the greenbelt justification.
No, Mrs.
So is there any other questions? But
should I just go back to paragraph 146 of the MPPF, which is of course of primary importance here. Just to emphasise the fact that the requirement of paragraph 146 is that the development is not inappropriate. So whether it's a local transport infrastructure which can demonstrate a requirement for a greenbelt location is one element, but it can only be justified if it preserves openness and of course not conflict with the purposes of including land within a greenbelt. That particular purpose would be one of encroachment.
thank you, Mr. Shadravian, for that. Can I just, I don't think there is anything majorly to discuss on the greenbelt side, to be fair, because you've set it out in the note. But again, I just want to understand what the extension of the boundaries would mean in greenbelt terms in relation to exceptional circumstances, and you've set those out. I don't necessarily want to go through those in great detail. But in terms of the area that was assessed as part of the greenbelt study, now as part of the under paragraph 11 of your statement of your note, you say that that the new boundaries are not considered to materially alter the assessment, which considered that this would have a moderate impact on the greenbelt. Could you just explain, or could you just explain why you consider that is the case, please? Is that in reference to part 2 of the greenbelt study and what the part 2 says? It's not just about what the part 3 says in relation to the actual site itself.
Thank you, Inspector. So yes, with regards to the part of the greenbelt study, so it would be the part 2 study. So in terms of the site in itself falls within the same parcel. So it was sort of set out in the study as parcel 25. Just referring back to my notes. So the parcel itself is contained by the A127 to the north, the B186 on the east, railway line to the south, and then the M25 on the western boundary. And in terms of the actual site-specific boundary that was assessed, obviously, yes, that was the original submitted version of the plan, with these additional areas being on top of that. In terms of that assessment, as we've set out within the document, the recent examination that we've submitted, we feel that these additional boundaries, as we've set out, wouldn't materially affect the outcomes of that study or the conclusions of the assessment, on the basis that there's considered to be a moderate impact on the contribution of the site to the greenbelt, and therefore I think the boundaries that are proposed, obviously they would be different from what was originally assessed, but we feel that the conclusions would still be reached, would be the same, particularly on the basis of, as a study sets out, that particular parcel is well contained in itself. I think there was comments within that about the southern portion, looking at the contribution towards the countryside, and the fact that this would still be within that remit, really. I think you're just on mute, Inspector.
Bound to happen. So can the council just clarify the amount? You've got the sums there for the different parcels of land. How much additional land would this mean to be taken out of the greenbelt in totality? I.e., how big would the site be in E11? What would be? I know it wouldn't increase the amount of employment on the site because Mr.
Right.
Taylor made it clear that it wouldn't be additional employment land, but it would still be additional land to be taken out of the greenbelt. So I just want to understand how much now would be on top of the allocation as it's currently set.
Just have to check. It may just take me a few minutes.
You have got the parcel sizes on. It's on St Modwen's plan.
Yeah, I think the printout version I've got in front of me I can't read, but
Oh, fortunately I can. So, but I won't add it up. If you can just, yeah, I mean, I can add those bits up, but we aren't supposed to do our own calculations.
No, that's fine. I can get a version I can read. So apologies.
Yeah, I've got it up on the screen as well. So. In the meantime, Mr. Warden, is there anything further you want to ask on this matter?
On this particular point, or on the
No, just on the entirety of this session.
Mr. Taylor has confirmed that Mr. Shadavian has also said that the land that would be the subject of this discussion, apart from the road, would be used for landscaping and would not be used for build development. So is the policy wording before us that would enable that to be set out in policy?
I would have anticipated that the control will be exerted at development management stage by way of condition in terms of what area can be developed and what other areas are to perform functionally in relation to the development. I think it would be appropriate to add something to the explanatory text to that effect.
Would it not be appropriate for the policy itself to set out that area, that I don't know how we define it, but the area to the south of the site is for landscaping and access and not to be used for built development?
It is possible to include some wording to that effect. The problem is identifying specifically which areas we're talking about in the policy itself. So I'd need to give that some consideration. It's not something I'd like to respond to you at this moment in time. I can discuss this, of course, with Mr. Taylor, and we could come up with a joint proposal or a series of different proposals to put before you, which you could consider in terms of the most appropriate way to deal with this. So I'm getting a lot of interference. Is it me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly clearly. I'm not getting interference, but
I'm so sorry. I couldn't hear myself even for a moment. What I'll do is discuss it. I understand the issue here, because if we're going to release this land from the Greenbelt, we need to make absolutely sure that it should be free of any development other than that which is being promoted for those parts. Quite understand that. So we have the option of either looking at changes to the policy in order to provide that added security, and adding it to the supporting text, or looking at adding it to the supporting text. We can provide you with a form of words which is agreed, which you can then consider in your own time and determine whether it's something which ought to be promoted through the modifications procedure in due course. So I'm sure Mr. Taylor will be happy to assist us in that regard, so that we give you an agreed position.
Absolutely.
thank you. Just another point in relation to that boundary of the southern area. The blue area and the yellow areas have been set out on the documentation, and we've discussed the case for taking them out of the Greenbelt. But the boundary as proposed to be taken out of the Greenbelt takes more land out of the Greenbelt than the blue area and the yellow area together. And I'd just like to understand why that is so. Is it because it follows a definitive boundary on the ground? And I'm looking at Google Street View at the moment, and it looks to me to be a very wide open field on that part of the site. So I can't see a definitive boundary, and obviously on our site visits we will have another look at that. Are you following Mr. Coulter? I can see you looking at it. I just wonder that in the council's proposal, there is the boundary follows a straight line across, whereas the yellow area actually curves back in and goes to a peak and then drops down for the blue area. So one, we need to make sure that we're not taking more land out of the Greenbelt than is necessary. And secondly, we should be looking to ensure that Greenbelt boundaries, when we're setting them, can follow, if necessary, appropriate defined boundaries on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, apologies. I think I just now you've pointed that out. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I think may well be a mapping mistake in terms of what's been set out, but in terms of the actual figures, the actual numbers, I was just looking at, obviously, just trying to add those up. They are, in terms of obviously what's set out in the plan that we've been referring to in terms of the additional land. So where we've got the total gross figure for the total size of the site being, sorry, bring up my screen again. It's 49.16 hectares, and then of that, the additional land would be 14.77 hectares, but that still doesn't change the developable area of 25.85 hectares that we had in the submitted version of the plan. But I think in terms of the mapping, we would need to make sure, because I agree, in terms of making sure that if that's either the council's mistake or it's the site promoter's mistake in terms of their mapping on their plan. Obviously, that's not a plan that we've directly prepared on in terms of the one the coloured areas, but in terms of the paper that we submitted, we did provide. Obviously, that's the full area there. But yeah, I think we'll just need to cross-check between those to be absolutely certain, because yeah, you're absolutely right. We don't want to be letting that slip through if that's not the case.
So I think it appears to me, anyway, from the St Modwen plan, the promoter's plan, that that line follows a natural boundary, and I just would like some confirmation that that is the case, which would then seem to indicate that the error might be ours in terms of the boundary shown in the submitted document.
Mr. Taylor, are you able to assist?
I'll do my best, sir. My understanding is, firstly, the whole reason for providing the yellow area is to enable the creation of a new boundary for the site, which in itself becomes the defensible boundary. And so I think that the line itself, I'm uncertain. I've read somewhere about a ditch, but I can't remember if it's that line or another line. So we may have to come back to you on that when we discuss things with Mr. Shadarabian and his team, if that's acceptable.
This is something that obviously we will look at in detail on site, but it looks to me from looking at the site aerial photographs that it doesn't follow a boundary.
Yeah.
In which case, to your point, Mr. Taylor, about setting a new boundary, we would need to ensure that we would need to be satisfied in considering exceptional circumstances that we were taking land out of the greenbelt that was that
there would be such a boundary, yeah,
and there would be such a boundary that would endure for long term.
I quite take that point, and indeed that may be something that we need to address in any wording that we come up with in the various options that we might float for you. I've just been told by my team that my recollection of a ditch is incorrect, so that just shows how good my Swiss cheese of a brain is. So we will address that and come back to you on that particular point. I think actually it may well be that Mark Flatman, yes, he's got his hand up. I think he can probably explain it better than I can anyway.
Thank you. Mr. Flatman.
Hello, thank you. So I was just going to clarify that the line shown on the plan that you were just referring to, sir, is correct in the way it's drawn on our location boundary plan. The site doesn't have a defined boundary, as you correctly pointed out. It is an open boundary, and that was the same for the previous E11 submission plan and for this additional area. So whichever version was needing to be reinforced through new strategic landscaping, the need to provide a strong, defensible, robust boundary for the long term is the same regardless of which boundary you're considering. But the yellow area that's shown on the plan that we're talking about at the moment is the current expected extent of that reprofiling and that landscaping work that will be provided to create that strong, new, robust, defensible boundary. So I hope that sort of helps.
Thank you. And just so I'm clear, it does go up, doesn't it, where it meets the blue area?
It does kink in. That is correct, sir.
And just where it meets the blue area, why would it not come straight across at the top bit? What is it that defines that southern push in the southwestern corner? What is it about the nature of that landscaping profiling requirement that would define would push it down that far?
I think again it's because of the lie of the land, because the land to the east is starting to fall back towards the railway, and as you're talking about in the highways element, the land is in a slight dip down there. So in order to get back down, the depth of the reprofiling is slightly less in that area because of the nature of the tying into the access road. So it doesn't need to be carried straight across to meet perpendicular with area 2.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Flatman. So is the council going to come back to us with a revised plan in terms of land that it would propose to be taken out of the greenbelt?
Yes, sir. We're going to make sure that the plan is accurate, and come back to you with that, with proposed rewording of the policy or the options that are available to you to consider. We might also, in order to allay any potential fears that boundary will not be treated properly, think about including a requirement in the policy for structural landscaping along that boundary as well. But again, I can discuss that with Mr. Taylor. So we'll come back to you on that, and also the wording of the policy and that boundary change.
Thank you, Mr. Showdovian. I was going to hand back to Mrs. Wright, but Mr. Flatman's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's just a couple of other points about other constraints in and around the southern boundary. There are gas and water mains in that location, and overhead power lines as well. So they all sort of, to a degree, have an interplay in the way that the landform profile is being formed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. No, that's very useful. Thank you for that. I don't have anything further, so unless there is anybody else who wishes to make any further comments, obviously this is something we need to go away and consider once we've received the relevant additional evidence from Mr. Shadaravian. So unless anybody else has anything they wish to add, I'm content to draw this session to a close. So anything further from anybody? No,
thank you, ma'am. We're very grateful to you. Thank you.
No, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. That has provided some extra clarity that we needed. So so thank you for that, and we will obviously consider what we've heard today. So thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.
And we will see you again, Council, at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.